Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Westminster Consulting webinar, Diversity in Financial Services. My name is Chuck Privatera. I'm one of your hosts and panelists. I think you're in for a real treat today. We're going to be talking about diversity in financial services, obviously, but in a couple different veins. One is in sort of the talent that financial services attracts, and also in the user experience and how financial services are delivered to the retail and institutional user, and the diversity issues around that. With me today are my two guests. Pat Ferrara is my colleague and head of our Human Capital Advisory Consulting practice at Westminster Consulting. Pat has extensive executive HR leadership experience in financial services, and so we welcome him and his contributions to the conversation. Our special guest today is James White. James is most recently with Lord Abbett as the head of diversity and inclusion for Lord Abbett, and prior to that was with Oppenheimer in a similar role, and spent some years in human resources with Merrill Lynch and Credit Suisse, so extensive background in financial services as well. So welcome, James, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, it's great to be here, I appreciate it.
Sure. So I'm going to set the stage for a second here, just to talk to go over what we're going to talk about. I mentioned this. We're going to sort of clear out the elephant in the room and talk about the fact that financial services is an old white guy business. It has traditionally been made up of mostly white men. There's a lot of legacy financial advisory folks in this business, and has been one of the slowest to improve diversity metrics in terms of talent. We are no different, the three guys that you're looking at on this webinar, but we feel we have a story here about allyship and the importance of being allies and serving this profession better. And there are really two areas that, and the two areas that I mentioned, I want to speak of briefly, and then we'll get right into questions for James. And so, having spoken about the fact that diversity in attracting talent is a priority, that should be no surprise that some of the metrics we at Westminster Consulting have seen over the last couple of years is white men tend to save more in their 401k plans. They tend to have less financial stress when measured through different surveys, and there's some reasons behind that. It's no surprise when you have white men developing and setting up the conversations around investing and savings. They may not have the best eye toward what is important to people of other cohorts. And so while retirement may be very important to white people as a number one savings priority, we've noticed that it is not the same for Black Americans, for Latino Americans, for the LGBTQ community. The priorities are, their number one savings priorities are different. So we're trying to tackle some of those issues. And so with that, I would like to kind of start it off by, James, Lord Abbett, I'm just going to anecdotally tell you what I've seen just from the colleagues that I know there. Since you've come aboard, it's a different organization, and they tell me straight up, we're better engaged. We feel more part of a family, and we never would have expected this 10 years ago from an organization like Lord Abbett. So tell us about that and your role there and how that's changed.
Well, thanks, Chuck. And it's such a great opportunity. Whenever I was back in the interview process, I've been with the organization for 2 years. October 8th is my anniversary. And I remember those conversations I was having, before an offer was extended and I decided to sign on the dotted line. And one of the things I reflect on now is that the organization had no formal diversity efforts, but it was in that summer that Doug Sig had stepped up to lead as our managing partner. He also brought to the table Kristen Maple, who had been with the organization for a long time as the chief impact officer, and Brooke Fapahunda as the head of human capital management. And the incredible thing was, when you speak to these individuals in the early process, there was an incredible hunger. And that's one of the things I'm looking for. I'm not so concerned about the progress an organization has made before I join, because I can build on anything as long as the right energy is there. And, there was tremendous focus on the fact that, to these three individuals especially, this work in diversity and inclusion was really certainly about making us a better company. And look, they were feeling the pressure from the outside, as we've seen in RFPs and questionnaires. Our clients want to know that we're doing work in diversity, that we have goals, that we're progressing. But, it wasn't just about that. It was really about the fact that this is the right thing to do. And there was a deep sense that this work very much aligned to the values of our organization, and that they were eager to build and get started with formal strategy. And that was incredible. It's one of the reasons I joined with the organization, because I hadn't seen that kind of passion and energy just starting off so early in the game. Sometimes you'll find that later on, once you've had some time to spend with the leadership team, this was a lot of energy to walk into. And it's very rapidly after that, as I completed my 100-day assessment of the organization, that we had a full-fledged 5-year diversity strategy. We had 5-year goals. There was a leadership buy-in and commitment. There was a desire to put this work in diversity, to integrate this into our performance management process. So all the right things were there. And, and frankly, it's been a great problem to have, because the organization has just been such incredible consumers of all that we're doing, from celebrating Heritage Months to building Women's Business Resource Group. They've been such incredible consumers of the work. The challenge has actually been keeping up with demand, and that's a really great problem to have.
I'm curious, James. You're there 2 years, and you've shown such tremendous success. First of all, congratulations. So change sometimes is like moving that ocean liner. You just can't say hard to port, and all of a sudden change has happened. Although you have moved rather quickly. So what was your experience? Did you find that it was one of these, okay, we're going to move this ocean liner a little bit at a time, or am I going to do hard to port, and hey, if things break in the process, we'll just move on from there?
Right. It's a great question. And one of the things I fundamentally believe about what you're trying to do, when you talk about evolution of a culture, of a business model, you have the thought leadership, but then you also have just basic management consulting, change management practices. And I feel that's very important. I've known people who are incredible thought leaders in the diversity space, but didn't know how to navigate, the corporate culture, the lines of business, the leadership to actually get things done. So whether we're building a new product, a new process, whatever that is, those change management concepts come into play. And so that's been what I think has been central, is I started to think about how to get things done in the diversity lens, but then I started to separate the two and say, well, how do you actually, what change management works? How does that work when we're talking about culture? And that has been really the game changer, I think, at Lord Abbett, is really, figuring out root cause, being able to map out the culture, where it was the moment I joined the organization, looking at lots of data, building that strategy, and then getting that strategy baked into the business strategy. That the business strategy is a very important thing to all organizations, right? And to have this work in diversity and inclusion baked into the business strategy with these 5-year goals, and then overlaying that with this change process, I think you can have all the passion and sort of enthusiasm in an organization that you want, but you have to be able to kind of move from point A to point B. And that's what the focus has been. Throughout every single thing we do in the organization, whether it's a guest speaker, some training that we're doing, we talk about performance management, everything we do begins with a reminder of the firm's 5-year goals, and how this aligns to the 5-year goals, and how this initiative is driving progress toward this goal or that goal. And so people feel that sense of, oh, we actually already feel it day to day, because we're talking about things they never talked about 3 years ago. But they also feel it because we're constantly reminding people about the 5-year strategy, the goals, and we're really checking in on our progress. This is working. We need to fine tune this and course correct a bit. We're doing this. We're also very focused on the sequencing of our events. If I had come in and started to run unconscious bias training my first few days there, people didn't know who I was. They need to build trust in me, or I need to build their trust, gain their trust. We need to talk about what this diversity practice is. So it's, building that foundation, normalizing the conversation about diversity, and then that whole change process, measuring progress along the way, like that has how we've been successful.
Yeah, and that first, again, congratulations on that. And so I'm hearing, although you didn't use the word, but I'm hearing, I guess it's my HR hat, I'm hearing, sustainability and maintenance, right? And so now that you've righted the ship, or maybe that's the wrong way of saying, because it sounds like there was a lot of passion there already. You were able to kind of peel back that onion and expose it. But now that you've righted the ship, and now the ship is on the right course, how and I love cruising, so if you hear a lot of these things, it's got to do with my passion for cruising, which I've missed. So now that you've got the ship moving in the right direction, how do you maintain that? I mean, everything from bringing in a consultant, bringing in a new employee, every memo that's sent out. How do you maintain that?
Right. Well, that's a great question, because it takes a lot those first 2 years to kind of get this machine off the ground. It is a heavy lift, because often, especially if it's an organization who's never had a formal strategy or worked with somebody like me, there's a lot of this. What does this work mean? What is this person going to ask of me? Does this guy know anything about diversity anyway? Looking at the color of my skin as well. And so there's a lot of that. I think that when you get to, okay, I've built trust, I've created some opportunities through training where people are starting to learn, light bulbs are starting to go off. It's really the reinforcement. And so part of that comes, you mentioned this before, through our core HR processes. Being deeply ingrained and driving governance and accountability across all those processes has been very important. So we are engaged in the recruiting process. We're engaged in the talent sourcing process. We're engaged in the way in which you write resumes or job descriptions. We are engaged in the performance management process. The idea of diversity, people never really get away from it. It's not like a program that you had to go and attend, last week and you've done that, it's on your transcript. It's so infused in the external messaging. It's so infused in the day-to-day conversations. We get weekly messages and town halls from our managing partner, from Doug. This work of diversity, it never really leaves the conversation. And also between that, the presence that's always there, and this continuous reinforcement and building on what we did yesterday, that's been really important. Now, we know that going into our third year, I'm starting to look to say, well, are there any areas that we need to course correct, that we need to maybe further enrich or clarify or be more specific around? All of that, of course, happens when you start moving into the third year. But also at this point in the third year, we're able to conduct training and host conversations that we could not host a couple of years ago. So right now, to be able to bring people together, to bring our communities of color together, to talk about some of the things that they're experiencing in this crazy 2020, and to hear their candor, and talking to our managing partner and very senior leaders in the organization, hearing their willingness to share what their days are like, things they think about, fears they have when it comes to, state and local government. We know we've done something right. So now it's how do we continue to build on that?
Yeah, and that's, again, I'm sorry, Chuck, to be getting off into the HR realm, but that's my hat. And I'm hoping that, people are looking and trying to hear tips from James. I know I'm getting a bunch on how to not only implement it, but maintain it. You mentioned senior management, and I guess everyone on this call would agree that getting them engaged up front is the most powerful thing. Where do you experience, because I'm sure you do, the most resistance in your organization and in your experience in financial services in other financial services organizations?
Yeah. You know what? I'll tell you, every organization, and I don't believe this is just in financial services, every organization is going to have a few people who are explicit in their, I'm not understanding what this is about, how in the world is this going to make us a good company, I'm not all in, I'm just going to do my own thing. And you have to accept the fact that there are going to be people who feel that way or not saying anything. They're just shaking their head yes. Right. I'm not too concerned. I find, especially frankly in this, especially the last 3 to 5 years, is that if I put my focus on those people who are all in, ready to learn, who are allies, ready to commit, ready to try new things, ready to make mistakes, who are asking questions about what if I use the wrong term, or if I, how do I know if somebody identifies as Black or African American? When I see that, I'm okay, because I believe I'm not going to win over everybody. Now, the only time that's an issue, of course, is if it's at the top of the house. And so, I think that's what, people like me, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not necessarily concerned when it's in the peripheral, when it's in the organization. Sometimes, frankly, it can be an age demographic. I don't want to pin that on any one age demographic, but sometimes I do find some of it there. The only time it concerns me is when it's at the very top of the house. And for me, I'm not sure that's a place I want to spend my days. However, I do spend a lot of time, talking to CEOs and other senior leadership from other organizations to try to coach them and give them resources and talk through the lens of empathy about how whether they believe this or not, when you are able to connect to people who are working side by side you every day, you are having a great life. They look like they are, but the reality is that they probably aren't. When you can connect to that, I believe you can fundamentally change minds.
No, that's terrific.
Yeah, and I'm interrupting here for a second because I'm going to address a question that we have from the audience, and then I do have a follow-up question for you, James. And the question from the audience is, what are retirement savings statistics for women, white and non-white men mentioned? So I'll briefly go through some of the genesis for this work. I was asking these questions a couple of years ago, and this falls under the sort of column of, has anybody ever even looked at this? And without going into a long story, I just started to notice some things. And so finally, a company, a big record keeper in Maryland, one of the largest, came to me and said, we've got some data that is going to surprise you, or maybe it won't surprise you. But the most relevant data I have to this question is the difference between men and women. So this was for the age groups of 21 to 37, and this was at year end 2018. Men were contributing an average of about 8% to the 401k plan, and women were at about 4.9. This is just as a percentage of pay. Start taking into account the fact that they make less money, women, than men in that age group. So right away, I recognized, there's a problem here, and it's a lot bigger than I thought, and it's for a younger group of people, which I would have thought was starting to get more balance. Now, and this is, again, anecdotally, but when we see a problem between men and women, there's no doubt we're going to start seeing trouble with communities of color, BIPOC, and then especially intersectional issues. So yes, for Black Americans, the savings rates were around what white American women were. When you looked at Black American women or Latina women, they were much lower. So these are the statistics that frightened me and got me to saying, okay, well, wait a minute, why is this? And it's not, yes, there is some income issues there, but these are as percentages. So, and then we started looking at, into other areas of the fact that it's a bunch of white guys developing engagement and conversations that may not be relevant to these different groups of folks. And so hopefully that answers the participant or the audience member's question. James, I want to kind of circle back to where we were before, because I had found myself, and then now in 2020, find myself having this conversation all the time, and it's around, diversity and inclusion doesn't just benefit the classes of employees that are typically marginalized. It benefits everybody. And so we see that, you see that. It's not just about making, and of course it is about, there are specific things that you want to make better for BIPOC and women and LGBTQ plus, but when things get better for everyone, they get better for everyone, right? And explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that, I never try to lose sight of that fact with the business case for diversity, that, it certainly makes us better companies, increases ROI, revenue, innovation, so many things. One of the things I think is interesting is that, when we think about, and I talk a lot about this in larger groups, when you envision yourself in dinner, having dinner with a lot of people, and there's a large sound coming in. I hope it's not interrupting my call. There's a buzz
That's
upstairs.
okay.
Sorry about that. Bear with me. But when you're having dinner at a table with people who are just like you have that same dinner with another group of people who are very multicultural. The conversations around that table are going to be very different. It's great whenever you have people you're spending time with who are just like you. It's a great place to commiserate, to talk about the tough week you've had. They're probably not going to challenge you that much. When I'm having dinner at a table with people who are nothing like me, you can envision that my ideas are going to be challenged. There will be a lot more thoughtful debate. That makes all of us better, every single one of us around that table better. So I think we have to think a lot about that. The other thing I think a lot about that too is that, fundamentally, this is a human rights issue. And, we can feel good about the fact that when we are helping with Chuck, some of the stats you just mentioned, when you were talking about giving access to communities of color who maybe were not, saving a lot in their 401k plans, when you are giving access to underrepresented talent, access to the talent pipeline, access to wealth building, that actually contributes to that 401k because, and that is a fundamental human rights issue.
Yeah, and I think that's so spot on. And Chuck knows because we've had these conversations over many months. When we think about internally, so there's, Lord Abbott is got internal issues that it wants to deal with before it can now service a larger community with financial services. So when we think about things like how do we design these plans internally, when you think of diversity, equity, and inclusion from an HR perspective, you think of the most obvious things: the hiring, the recruiting, the sourcing, the developing, but it's the structural, right? It's how is that K plan designed? How are we getting people who are less highly compensated more money, right? Within what is allowed by the regulator, which is true, and having that conversation internally only can occur when people's minds have been opened, as you've done, with the whole DEI discussion and with the change. So once their minds are open and once your employees' minds are open, that really works for our customer as well. So it is, in a way, very much connected to the ROI of the company. And look, it is financial services. So let's, just as Chuck said, it's a lot of old white guys, although I don't consider myself that old. But the reality is it's all about making money as well. Let's not get too far from that point of being in financial services. So you can make money by servicing the civil rights of people. So that's, I think, a very strong message that you're delivering.
Yeah, and I just wanted to go back to, I wanted to address there was another study that I should reference because once I started digging into utilization by individuals or employees in the workplace, another large company based in Newark, Financial Services, did a survey of employees and ranked their #1 savings priorities. And so no surprise that white men #1 savings priority is retirement, making sure they have enough money so they don't outlive their savings in retirement. Black Americans' #1 savings priority was educating their children. Asian Americans' #1 savings priority was making sure they had money for an in-law or to care for an elder or a parent. The Latina community #1 savings priority was to make sure that they were able to meet their monthly obligations. LGBTQ plus reported that their #1 savings priority was making sure they didn't leave a partner without income if something should happen to them. And so while we all agree that retirement savings is important, when you start the conversation with you need to save 12% in your 401k plan, you are alienated a huge part of the population. And so I think it certainly begins with having diverse talent designing how to meet individuals where they are. And I think we as a financial services business have a lot of work to do to achieve that. But I do want to go back to the HR side of things. And I know this is what you guys love to talk about too, because I've had personal experience with some of your individual employees, James, who have said this is a different organization, and I want to drill down, say more about how diversity and equity and inclusion can provide for an entire culture change.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you're talking about just the presence of diversity within the culture, or just the process itself.
Well, I mean, I was just speaking to a couple Lord Abbott employees that say it's just a different place to come to work to every day. It's just the whole culture is different. It's better. It's improved.
How I'm treated is how I'll treat my customer. I think that it's all connected.
Yeah. And I think that people will share with you that there's a much better sense of recognition around who they are. There's a much better sense of being recognized that they are one of few in the organization. When it comes to a woman, for example, on a team of all men, there's a much greater sense of community within all of our underrepresented communities. We actually have a group of LGBTQ people who meet regularly, have gotten to know each other, which has been incredible. Most of them will tell you they felt like they were the only one in the organization over many years. So I think that, from the training, I think you're going to see that people also feel more equipped and empowered to talk about this work in diversity, because it's something that they weren't sure how to talk about before. So you can see this idea of we have demystified and we have simplified some concepts that before seemed very complex, or at the very least, too complex to talk about in the workplace. One of the things I think about it, this is something we used to, was not the case a while back, was you could not talk about religion and politics in the workplace. But those are two very important things to me and most of the world, regardless of where you live. And so we say, bring your whole self to work. We don't talk about politics and don't talk about religion. That seemed kind of funny to me. And so one of the things I focus a lot on, and some of the things I've gotten some of the most candid feedback on, has been, when we moved toward Easter, and if you think about Easter this year, we were locked down. We were starting to feel the shock settle in around knowing that this is going to be a long-term situation. The death tolls were rising. It was a very stressful time. And I wrote a very long post internally around, as we go, this is on Wednesday before the Easter weekend. And what I said there was, look, as we go into this weekend, this Wednesday, we have, Good Friday, Easter, Passover, let's connect to the fact this is going to be a long-term situation, and resilience is going to be our friend here. But we have to figure out how to make that happen. This is not about going to training anymore. And so one of the things I said there was, look, regardless of how you thrive, think about, now is the time for you to think about what that means. If it is yoga, if it's going for long walks, it's for playing with your kids. If it is prayer, if it is meditation, do those things. And it really was the first time people said to me, gosh, nobody has ever said the word prayer at a company that I have ever worked at before. And you're actually telling me that if I thrive through prayer, through my faith, to go and live, do that and feel good about that and embrace that and even talk about it. We're not talking about, proselytizing. We're not talking about that at all, but we're talking about just being yourself. I get so many emails over that topic alone that the power of that. And then again, when we went into the election cycle, we talked a lot about, look, let's be clear, regardless of who your political affiliation, no one is untouched by United States politics right now. I mean, let's be clear. Let's acknowledge it. It's going to be a long and painful holiday election season, most likely going through January. It is okay to say, I'm having a bad day. I'm going to take the day off. I need to replenish, and let's acknowledge it. Let's not pretend like it doesn't exist. It's been those kinds of disruptors that people say to me over and over again. 3 years ago, first of all, we would have never had a head of diversity. If we had one, it would not be a senior out LGBTQ person. And finally, we would not be talking about the things that you have introduced that are real to all of us, that you've had a way of simplifying so that it's approachable and we can talk about those things. So when we talk about cultural change management, that's what we're talking about, I think.
That's it. Yeah. I'm going to step in for a second here because I have another comment from the audience. and I'm going to do my best to address it. It says, for retirement plans, isn't it really about spending the communication efforts with the populations that most need it? For example, if you know that a specific group needs 80% of the help, why not focus there? And by default, the success of the plan is achieved. So that is a good point. The issues that I think we face is because retirement is not as many people's number one priority. The 401k plan is the only conversation at work generally, or has been in the past. So if we're telling people you need to be, if somebody's not saving in the 401k plan and we're focusing on them and telling them they need to be saving 10%, when they're concerned about meeting their monthly obligations or have credit card debt or have issues just paying their bills, that's a non-starter. Now, when we have a conversation with that individual about how to properly budget, how to save for an emergency, how to pay down their credit card debt, it may not be today that we get them to 10% in their 401k plan, but we will get them to 1, 2, 3%, and then eventually on their way. The problem is, and I'm going to dip my toe into some controversial waters here. The financial services industry, on the retail side of things, is set up really well for people that have money. Generally, advisors and advisory firms get paid based on how much money they're managing. So there's not a whole lot of incentive for someone to sit down with someone who's got $5,200 in credit card debt and $48,000 in student loans. There's just no money in it for the advisor or the investment firm. Well, we've got to put a stop to that, because the employees that need our help the most don't have money, and they need us to help them create some money. And that's where this is this is where BIPOC are overrepresented in this group of people. The lower end of the income spectrum and the lower end of the savings spectrum. And so we can't even be having conversations about retirement. There's a new word in 2020, a new phrase in 2020, and this came from a study out of the Brookings Institute that said employees are going to start organizing around what they're calling is financial fragility. This is the idea that large groups of employees at companies feel like they are one paycheck away from financial ruin. As an organization, I don't care what company or what kind of success you're having, you cannot have groups of employees being productive or coming to work with that feeling. And so while I agree that when it comes to the retirement plan, we want to focus on the folks who aren't saving, our first goal can't be to get them to start shelving away all kinds of money into the 401k plan. It has to be meet them where they're at and understand what their individual needs are, and recognize that some of it may be different than what our expectation is because of the lens that we're looking through. So I appreciate that comment, and hopefully I answered it. And Pat,
and if I could just add a little bit of a coda to that, again, to get back to an earlier point that I hopefully made, we who run the plans internally are responsible, if for nothing else, the people who work for us. And we have a lot of power, right? We have a lot of authority in how those plans are designed and how those plans are administered. And having managed them for 3 decades myself before, at my former company or companies, there are a lot of times where there were things we could have done to help the non-highly compensated, Black, white, women, it doesn't matter. And it's not that we neglected to do it, but the conversation never took place. To James's point earlier, when you're with people that think like you and look like you, the conversation revolves around things that you're used to. Right? We're going to cut the 401k. Let's cut it for everybody. Well, why cut it for the CEO? We want him. No, cut it for the CEO, but don't cut it for the person, who's sweeping the floors. You can do that. The IRS allows you to do that, but we don't have that conversation, right? Because we're sitting and we're all well off for the most part. And we're thinking, oh man, I'm not going to get my big contribution this year. So making it easier to have the conversation, and to, one of the things James has done at Lord Abbott is made it easier to have difficult conversations. Difficult conversations really run an organization. Once you feel more comfortable having the difficult conversation or the odd conversation, the different conversation, then you can have some real change. And once the employee feels like they're changing, then she goes out and she treats her customer that way too. And that's how it's organic. At least that's how I see it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
so interesting too, that there's a notion of difficult conversations, whether it's diversity work, whether it's talking to clients. First of all, sometimes, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And I think that's something I've tried to level set there. My job in life is not to be comfortable, it is to learn and to grow. And that's going to require some discomfort. And second of all, that's how we progress. And I think we have to think about that. Some of the most important work we do is going to involve some discomfort, and it's okay. And
Yeah.
there's no amount of learning or education or handholding you're going to get that's going to make you feel less comfortable.
So, James, I want to cover, something that's near and dear to Westminster. It's been our contention that this part of, if you haven't looked at this, and this is again my burning question, have we even ever looked at it? And it's, and I've had this discussion before. I'll give an example. So very recently, with the passing of Chadwick Boseman, we were introduced to an interesting discriminatory practice in employee benefits. And again, this is not intentional, but it was the idea that at age 50, colon cancer screenings are free from most health plans for men, and I believe women, I'm not sure, but I know for men at age 50, colon cancer screenings are free. They've identified that this is the time when things can get turned, to more dangerous, and this is, this makes sense for everybody, except some work is being done to say, well, that's not the case with Black men. Black men tend to see metastasization. I think I got it. Close. A little earlier. And so is there a conversation to be had here around age 40? Now, what my point to this conversation is that I don't believe, and I don't think most of us believe, that there's a group of old white men intentionally sitting in Hartford making these decisions saying,
exactly,
how do we exclude the Black guys from this? But what happened was, because they're white men, they just look at a population of men and say this is the average age, and not isolating what has, obviously a problem. And so right now, as we speak, companies are looking to change this. And I believe this is the same thing in the 401k world. I don't think anybody's looked at savings rates by race or by gender or sexual orientation or anything. So now that we're looking, my long way to this question is, all the work that you're doing and all the work that we see at organizations on hiring and culture and promoting, and can it be undone by little inclusive issues like the ones we're talking about today?
I absolutely think so. I mean, I'm an optimist by nature, frankly. Other people may feel differently than me, but I feel that it's this, if you're not, all the programs, all the speakers we have, that's all great stuff. But if that's not designed with structural issues in place, structural issues that may not have been deliberately designed to exclude people, there's still structural issues, and we have a responsibility to try to disrupt those issues. So I think, it's not about trying to make people feel bad about systems of structural inequities that we inherited. Many of us, we inherited at the expense of other people. It's not trying to make people feel bad about that, but it's about helping people to understand their responsibility and doing what they can do to change that. And it's those structural elements. The idea you gave about the cancer screenings is a perfect one. It's not about trying to make people feel bad. It's about trying to get smarter, understanding these institutional structures of inequity, because they're all around us and they're hiding in plain sight. And so a lot of the work I do in the bias training is not to say you're biased, you're a bad person, but it starts to help you to understand, wow, when I look around at the world around me, these structures are everywhere. They're on the bottle of Aunt Jemima syrup. They're with Uncle Ben's rice. I've been looking at those brands since I was a kid. I've been buying those products. I never thought about it. See, if I do my job right, I'm going to at least get a good percentage of those people to see it next time before they read about it in the New York Times, and then help them also to understand when they see it, and then make it a practice of seeing. that when they do see it, well, here's some things you can think about in terms of reaction. Is it a boycott of the product? Maybe, I don't know. Is it writing a letter to the CEO? Maybe, I don't know. But the thing is that, just being able to get people to start to see, to be deliberate before you read about it, as I said in the New York Times, that's what we're trying to do here, is that type of disruption, so that you are really looking at the world through a new lens, recognizing that all of these systems are not sometimes these massive, ugly, scary looking things, but actually things we live in, a lot of us benefit from, but that they're actually hurting other people. And so how do we disrupt that? So that's my feeling on that. I absolutely think there's change that we can make that will disrupt permanently, sustainably for generations to come.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And you and I both know Jennifer Brown, and you always hear her talk about, there's no shame in our biases. I mean, it can't be a culture about calling people out or pointing fingers. It has to be about, okay, didn't know this. Now it's our responsibility to try to fix this. But and I think that we as we talked about earlier when we were preparing for this call, we're seeing new and more of this every day.
Right. Well, I think too, and I've talked to CEOs in the past few years, and one of the things that some of them have shared with me is that they're not, they don't know what to do when somebody like a D&I leader comes into their space and basically makes them feel bad because of all the privilege they've acquired, and I do appreciate that. People don't like to feel bad. That's not my job. My job is to turn on the light bulbs that sort of, illuminate the world around you in a different way. You may feel badly as a result of that, and that's okay. But our job inherently should not be to make people feel bad. Growth, as I said before, sometimes I learn things and I don't really like what I see in the mirror sometimes. That's okay. It's a part of how I grow. That's how I know, frankly, that I'm really absorbing those lessons. And my job, as I said before, is to really help people then determine, actions. Because, you can have all the revelations in life you want, but if you are not empowered with the skills that you need to decide how to work towards solving that issue, then we've stopped short.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and I think that's incredibly powerful. I wanted to sort of touch on one last thing here because I'm thinking about the culture at Lord Abbett, and I'm thinking about how the culture determines the utilization or the clients or how the clients are served. Some of the data that I've seen says I don't, as a example, as a Black woman, I don't necessarily need a Black female financial advisor, but I need somebody who understands that me being a Black female, I have different needs than so. Say a little bit about that and what you think maybe how the culture change at Lord Abbett can better serve the needs of the community around.
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. I was, one of the things I spent so much time with clients, with people who are buying our funds over the years. And one of the things that they said to me over and over again, that, as a Latino woman, if you don't understand the role that I play in my household, how are you going to help me with my investments?
Right.
And that's been, I think, really was a game changer for me. So I try to share a lot with our investment team, with our client-facing folks, to help them understand if we're trying to support people's, what our business is, it's fundamentally a business of sustainability. And so how do we do that? How do we do that just by making products? It's not enough. We have to understand the needs of our clients. And that's been really important for me to really talk to them about, again, through that lens of empathy, helping them to understand the role of a woman of color in the household in terms of buying cars, insurance, savings, spend, all those things. It's not often what we think it is. And yes, it is a business opportunity, but also it's what we're trying to do. We are there to create long-term sustainability through wealth. And how can we do that if we don't understand that every single one of us is different? We come from different backgrounds, our habits are different, and our educations are different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd go a step further, and I'd say it's our responsibility to create wealth for everyone. It's one thing to say, hey, white guys, they're always thinking about retirement. Yeah, white guys are thinking about retirement when they're 50. When they're 21, they're probably not, I can remember when I was 21, retirement was a long way off. So I think it's our responsibility to meet people where they are. And I think we do a great job of that at Westminster, and say, hey, look, you are going to be retired one day, but I know you're saving for a house now. So let me help you save for the house and for the 3 kids that you want to put through college. But
Right.
don't go so far, because I'm also going to help you save for retirement. So,
Yeah.
and that's where opening up and understanding. So I think that's a great point that you make, James, and Chuck, you've been making for a long time. And thank you for doing that. So I think that's important. Meeting people where they are, but not forgetting that they will retire one day,
Right.
and these things will happen in their lives. So it's our responsibility, ethically, and I'm going to throw a big word in there, ethically, to do that.
Hmm.
Well, and it also goes back to that when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity. That's what we're trying to do. What you just said was I completely agree with. Everybody has a different path. We're all trying to get to a happy retirement, a happy time in life when we can buy homes and put our kids through college. I think it's a matter of understanding every path is different, so every solution is different, every approach is different. I think that's so important, both in the marketplace with our clients, but also just how we help talent internally. Women of color getting to the leadership pipeline. LGBTQ people. Rising through the ranks. People with a disability. Helping them a lot of not just around things like accommodation, but helping people around them to understand that the accommodation does not mean they have lesser skills. All of that through the equity lens, I think, is how we're going to kind of reach some of our goals.
Yep.
Where do you or Lord Abbott, where are you taking things next? Where do you see need for work or further improvement, or what's on the horizon for James White and Lord Abbott in the next few years?
Well, one of the things I think about, and again, I have to apologize if there's any noise, construction always starts the minute when you're on a call. So sorry about that. If you can hear anything out there, so sorry. I'm trying to be on mute as much as possible. One of the things I think we're really looking at, though, is this idea of racial, equity. And, we understand, that there's an immediate need to address some of the things we're hearing in the news this year. So we're trying to be responsive on the immediate front. However, we know that's not a long-term solution. So we are investing now in the efforts to build a long-time strategy around racial equity. And it's interesting, and I'm cautious. I'm saying this just from James White this morning as I'm reading the president-elect's website. There's a fundraising website and there's the president-elect website, 2 different sites now. And I'm looking at some of the things that the president-elect, again, this is not about who my candidate is. This is just more about priorities for the nation moving ahead. And there's some very interesting data bullet points there on the website that speak to things like access to housing, access to education. If you're looking for a North Star, there are some good data points there. But we realize that writing a check to the NAACP, for example, that is not an investment in solving for one of those structural systems of inequity. We need to be thinking long-term, like 10, 15, 20 years. And so we are really thinking about our midterm, our early responsiveness, the midterm sustainability in terms of training, understand more about racial inequities, but also then that longer term commitment, which is very important for us. That's the first one. The second thing we're thinking a lot about really is this idea of really integrating inclusive leaders into our performance management. Now, we know that we talked a lot about bias. We've reframed all of our bias training within the lens of 2020, because believe me, 2020 has given us a lot of examples on the news every single night, everything from xenophobia to George Floyd. I mean, it goes on forever. This has been an incredible accelerator of our work around bias, because I can talk about something in a classroom, but I can just show you, some of the stories from, conservative and liberal media channels the last 2 days in a row. These stories were terrible. We can look at it. It looks different now. There's a deeper sense of connection again. I've used the word empathy several times. There is no greater way to leverage empathy than in 2020 to drive change. And so we're really leveraging that wind in the sails. If I had to find a silver lining, is in this crazy very painful, very tough, ongoing year, is that it has been an accelerator a lot of our efforts. There's an urgency now. I mentioned before that our employees were really incredible consumers of this work in D&I. Now there is an urgency like I haven't seen before, and I'm happy about going forward there. So we're going to enrich this conversation. We're going to drive all of this toward a very clear description of what inclusive leader behaviors look like. Those will then be mapped into our performance management competency model, and at that point, it's a part of our performance management process. So that's big. So we have the racial equity strategy we're going to invest in. There's the accountability across everyone equally through behaviors. And then we're also focusing much more on top down, meaning we have our 5-year diversity goals. Within each of our lines of business, we have something called diversity performance objectives. We understand that the 5-year goals are for Lord Abbott, but we also understand that within each line of business, there is a different microculture, different talent, different leadership, different business demands. So what we have said to each of our leaders in our lines of business is, what will you in technology do from your unique space to drive progress toward the diversity goals? What will you in legal? What are your unique contributions? We've built line of business specific diversity performance objectives. Some of them are around representation, some of them are other around cultural work. So the idea is we're really institutionalizing this idea of ownership, top down, business strategy, diversity, 5-year diversity goals, diversity performance objectives through the lines of business that then cascade down through the organization, and then across throughout every single employee, regardless of your role, through performance management. So those are the 3 big areas of focus for 21 and 22. We're really talking about sustainability here, though. The fact that it, and I hope I get to spend, many years doing this work. But my goal when I think about sustainability, when it comes to this work, is the idea that this is a human rights issue. It makes us a better business. And if we infuse this into the cultural DNA of the organization, this is not something that's such a heavy lift. It becomes a part of the culture and just something we do because it's who we are.
Sure. As we approach the 1-hour mark, I just wanted to maybe end on this this idea that I've certainly gone through in my journey to allyship, and it's this apathy, like really, what can I do? What kind of difference can I make? And I believe that there are a ton of white guys in my age group or range that, not intentionally again, but just the apathy sets in and they don't really see a clear path, or something hasn't easily presented itself as to how to be a part of the change. So tell us about allyship, the importance of it, and the road to it through empathy.
Yeah, I'm happy to. This is my favorite topics. One of the things I've really done a lot this year is to say, what, ally is not something that you really can call yourself.
Right.
This is not a noun. It's not a label, something you can say I'm an ally. If you say you're an ally to me, I'm going to say, great. Tell me some of the great things you're doing. If you've not in all this time of 2020, I know we've been busy, but if you've not watched one Netflix movie or streaming movie or another source on Black history, Black culture, I'm not saying you're not an ally, but I'm saying we need to have a talk about what allyship actually means, because it means doing things. It means, and I've said to people too, you can come to me and ask me, I want to do more, James. How do I do this? What do you need me to do? I'm happy to give you some things, but ultimately this has to be, if a practice, something that you can that you are committed to, that you actually earmark a part of, sometimes every day, a little bit of every day, thinking about it. But at the very least, every week, reading an article, reading a few chapters in a book, watching movies. And one of the things I firmly believe is that if you spend enough time immersed in this work, you will learn things that you fundamentally cannot unlearn. When you learn those things, there will be there as a result an incredible and intense need to do something. You will see things in the marketplace, in the world, at home that you've never seen before. You will start to then think about things you can do to change. To me, that's what allyship is. You don't learn to be a really good golfer by taking one golf lesson. You read the book, you practice all the time, you are financially invested, and it goes on and on and on. This is how you become a strong ally. It's not through your head of diversity. It's not because your CEO says you have to. It's because you care and because there are resources, a wealth of resources all around you. Spend time every single week, indulge, gather your co-workers, your friends, your family members together, talk about the work. Fundamentally, you will evolve, you'll be in a different place and a position where you are empowered to make change happen.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah.
And thank you for that.
Yeah, unless you guys have anything better, that to me was about
that's a tough act to follow, James.
I mean, that's kind of why we're here, and so that was nailed it. So thank you. And I noticed we've addressed all of the audience comments and questions, and we're going to give people, I guess, about four minutes back here. James and Pat, I just want to thank you so much for spending the time here. This is such an important conversation, and I appreciate you both.
Well, thank you, Chuck.
Thank you
and
all
thank you,
so
James.
much.
Thanks for the great example for everybody on the call, and myself and everyone else on the call.
Excellent. And I know that this will be available for anybody that came in late. And I guess we'll wrap it up there. Again, thank you for all who attended. And Pat and James, again, thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.